This is Excel Tips, a podcast for accounting and finance professionals, brought to you by CPA Australia.
My name is Neil Blackwood, and in this episode we're going to look at a question I received during a webinar. Someone asked for a loan schedule for a loan that had an interest-free period. Now, building loan schedules in Excel is reasonably straightforward because Excel has built-in functions for it, but it doesn't have a function that can figure out a repayment when there is an interest-free period. Now, I like a challenge, so I gave it a go, but I couldn't actually solve this with a formula. I had a few goes and pretty much failed each time. I could get close, but I couldn't actually get it to balance close enough that I was happy. So then I thought of GoalSeek. So GoalSeek works for simple what-if solutions. So basically the idea behind GoalSeek is you have a cell that you define as the goal cell, and then you provide Excel with a value that you want to achieve for that goal cell. And then you give it another cell that is the cell that you're going to change. So Excel is going to try different values in that cell to achieve the goal value for the goal cell. So you give it three inputs: the goal cell, the goal value, and then the cell to change. So in our case, I had the balance cell. So I had a balance cell that's returning the balance as at the last payment. So that should be 0. And then I had a repayment cell. So basically GoalSeek goes through and tries different values in this case, the repayment cell to arrive at 0 in the balance cell. And it works. It was fairly successful. You could change the settings. So different interest-free periods, different periods. I did have a limit of 60 on the number of periods, so I was working on months. So I figured a 5-year limit would be okay for an interest-free loan. And so if you want to see how it all comes together, you can check out the companion video on the In the Black website. There's also a couple of files there. I did expand on just using GoalSeek because the downside with GoalSeek is that it does require a few clicks to actually implement. And also, it doesn't remember anything. So some dialogues in Excel are good because they'll remember your past settings, but GoalSeek isn't one of them. So you've got to recreate the GoalSeek each time you do it, which is a little bit of a manual process. And so I thought it warranted creating a macro for it. So in the companion video, we go through and record a macro to apply the GoalSeek. And you'll find out that the macro code that creates GoalSeek is just a single line. So it's a very simple macro. So once you've created the macro, you can then link that to a button. So we in the video and the article, we take you through how you can link a macro to a button. So in the end, all you had to do was click the button and the GoalSeek would run. And it runs very quickly. So it's pretty much almost instantaneous. So that was a solution. But then I thought I could go one step further. So this is not in the article itself, but in the video, I take you through how you can automate the process. So that basically when you change one of the settings, it's going to automatically calculate the GoalSeek and the repayment. Now, this uses a macro technique called an event. So there's an event macro. So when the sheet changes, the macro is run. So when you change any cell on that sheet, it will automatically run the macro and re-estimate the repayment. Now, one thing I did before I created the event macro was that I went through and created 2 range names. One of the problems with recorded macros is that they capture the cell references and they hard key those into the macro. And so the problem with that is that you'll have a reference for something like, let's say, E5 in the macro, but if you insert a row above that, the macro won't actually update that cell reference because it's hard keyed into the code. One way around that is to use range names. And so what I did was I named the cell for the repayment. I called that repayment, very original. And the closing balance, I just called balance. And what we did was in the article and the video, we replaced the cell references in the code with the names, the range names. And that makes the macro a lot more robust, and it handles the ability to insert rows, columns, and delete rows and columns as well without actually breaking the macro. So once I did that, then it was a simple matter of copying that to the event macro. So I won't go through that in the podcast. You can check out the video for that. It's a fairly specialized, a little bit more advanced sort of macro when you're using events. I also used a conditional format on the sheet so that when the repayment wasn't balancing the loan, it would turn orange. If it was balancing, so I had a balancing factor of $1. So if I was within $1, I was happy. And so if it was within $1, it would go green. If it's more than $1, it would go orange. Now, to do that, I used a conditional format, and the conditional format actually changed two cells. So there was a label cell and then a balance cell, and both of those cells use the same conditional format. Now, when you're trying to build a conditional format that works on more than one cell, it's important to select the range that you're working on before you create the conditional format, and then when you're building the formula, because this was a formula-based conditional format, you need to use a fixed reference. So both cells, so there was a label cell and a balance cell, both cells were referring to the value in the balance cell when I created the conditional format for that. And in doing that, there was two conditional formats. One of them made it go green and one of them made it go orange. When creating the formulas for both conditions, I use the ABS function. So ABS is short for absolute, which is a mathematical concept. When you're using it in practice, what it does, it removes the minus sign from a value. So minus 10 becomes 10. In terms of the absolute side of things, it actually measures the distance from 0. So minus 10 is the same distance as 10, and so it returns the positive number. Now, the beauty with using ABS is that you can just do one comparison. So obviously, if I want to be within 1, then minus 1 and 1, I need to be between those. So instead of having to do two comparisons, so greater than minus 1 and less than 1, I can just use the absolute or the ABS function to convert the number to a positive and then just make sure it's less than 1. It's an easier way to do comparisons when you're trying to compare to a number that could be a minus number or a positive number. So the absolute, I checked for less than or equal to 1, and that was green. And then if it was greater than 1, then I changed that to orange. So that way you could see on the sheet if the current repayment wasn't actually repaying the loan, just in case something did change. Now, when I did the event macro, it was actually almost impossible not to have the repayment recalculated. So making any change on the sheet in terms of changing a value would automatically update the repayment. So even if I deleted the repayment, it would reappear because that would be triggered by the change event. I used the event called change. So anytime the worksheet changes, it runs the goal seek and it will populate the repayment cell. When you use that event, it only changes the sheet, so it doesn't affect any other sheet in the file, so it only recalculates or redoes the goal seek on that sheet. So there was quite a few different areas that I covered in this article. So we looked at the goal seek, we looked at conditional formatting, we looked at how we can automate using a macro, and then how we can automate a macro by running it automatically when something changes on the sheet. So quite a few different aspects. I hope you find the article useful. And again, check out the video if you want to see how it's all done. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Excel Tips, a CPA Australia podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, help others discover the show by leaving us a review or sharing this episode with colleagues, clients, or anyone else looking for the best Excel tips and tricks. To find out more about our other podcasts and CPA Australia, check out the show notes for this episode. And we hope you can join us next time for another episode of Excel Tips.